All right, so today on Capital Gains, we're going to do a deep dive into something that was pretty intense. The government funding showdown that almost shut down the entire U.S. government right before Christmas.
Right before the holidays, yeah.
Yeah. We've got a whole bunch of articles here detailing how disaster relief and aid for farmers and just a ton of political maneuvering, they all kind of like collided.
Yeah, it's a great illustration of how business and finance and politics, they're all connected.
Exactly. And we're going to break it all down and see how decisions, way up in those government halls, how they can actually like directly hit your wallet.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. We're talking about a situation where the government's ability to even function and provide all those, essential services, it was literally hanging in the balance.
Literally. Okay, so just to set the scene, Congress had a deadline. Midnight, December 20th. They had to pass a spending bill or face a government shutdown. I mean, over 800,000 federal employees were at risk of missing paychecks right before Christmas.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Big stress, right?
Can you imagine the holidays? And
it's a high-stakes game for sure. And this particular round, it started out looking like a done deal. There was this initial agreement, bipartisan, a massive 1,547-page spending bill to fund the government all the way until March 2025.
Okay, so 1,547 pages, done deal. Sounds good, right?
You would think so, right?
But this is where things get interesting. President-elect Trump and his efficiency czar, Elon Musk, they step in. They urge the Republicans to just reject the whole deal.
Yeah, totally unexpected.
Totally unexpected. They call it bloated. And they insist on adding this debt ceiling suspension, which just throws everything into chaos.
It really throws a wrench in the works.
Yeah.
This move, it really highlights, all the power dynamics that are at play. Trump, even though he wasn't officially president yet, he had this incredible influence over Congress. And then, of course, you have Musk, this business magnate, wielding this surprising, I'd say, political power.
It's wild to see how these guys, these non-governmental figures, can actually shape decisions that impact all of us.
Absolutely.
It's pretty mind-blowing. So this demand, right, to address the debt ceiling right then, even though it wasn't going to expire until January 2025, seemed pretty strategic on Trump's part.
Oh, definitely. It seemed very strategic. If he could tackle it early, it could potentially limit what the Democrats could do during his second term. It raises a question, too, about how future presidents might use similar tactics to kind of, force the legislative agenda.
It's very interesting. And this whole debt ceiling thing, can you break it down for us? It seems like a term people throw around but maybe don't totally get.
Yeah, sure. It's basically a legal limit on how much money the U.S. government can borrow to pay its bills.
Okay.
So when we hit that limit, Congress has to raise it, or the government risks defaulting, right? Not paying its obligations. And that could be disastrous for the economy.
Yeah, that's not good.
No.
Okay, so Trump and Musk throw this debt ceiling grenade into the mix. A whole week of uncertainty, several attempts to pass a spending bill fail. And all of this, the whole time, you've got this shutdown clock just ticking away.
Yeah. And in the meantime, you've got lawmakers trying to figure out all these other urgent needs, right? There's disaster relief for hurricane victims, aid to farmers who are having a rough time, and then, on top of it all, just keeping essential government services running.
It sounds really stressful. So what happened? Did they manage to stop the shutdown?
Yeah, they did, but it was close. Hours before the deadline, this new bill appears, only 118 pages, much slimmer than the original, right?
Oh, wow.
It basically funds the government till March 14th, 2025, but no debt ceiling provision.
Okay, so they kicked the can down the road on that one. But what about the other stuff? All the disaster relief, aid for farmers. Did that make it into the final bill?
Yeah, they did. The final bill included $100 billion in disaster relief. Super important, especially with hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Absolutely.
And then $10 billion for farmers who are struggling with, various factors.
Okay, so they managed to, keep the lights on in Washington and provide some crucial aid. But, wow, not without some pretty serious political drama. I'm guessing this whole episode has some takeaways for us, right?
Oh, absolutely. It highlights how, what seems like just some political fighting can actually impact your own personal finances. These decisions during this funding fight, they affect everything. Disaster relief efforts, the stability of the whole economy, it's all connected.
Wow. It also shows, I think, how power really works. We saw a president-elect, not even in office yet, exerting all this influence, and then a business leader like Musk playing a key role and shaping actual legislation.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we got to pay attention to these political things, even if they seem complicated or far removed from our everyday lives, because ultimately they have the power to impact us all. And it makes you wonder, like, if someone like Musk can have that much influence, I mean, what does that mean for the future of politics? Who else is going to come out of the woodwork as a power player?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know if anyone really knows the answer yet. But it definitely shows that we need like a lot more transparency in our political system and, people held accountable.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've kind of established, I think, that this wasn't just, some political drama happening way up there. This government funding fight really had like real consequences for people.
Huh.
But let's rewind for a sec and talk about that initial 1,547-page spending bill that got, tossed out. What was actually in it that caused so much controversy?
Yeah, well, besides just the sheer size of the thing, right? There were some things that really raised some eyebrows. For one, it had a 4% pay raise for members of Congress.
Yeah, not exactly the most popular move when a lot of people are kind of struggling financially.
No, not a good look, especially, in that climate.
Yeah, I can see why that would rub people the wrong way. What else?
Well, it also reauthorized the State Department's Global Engagement Center. And that's been criticized, by some, for basically pushing online censorship.
Oh, wow.
So that's a hot button issue, for sure.
That's a big one. Anything else that stood out?
Let's see. There was a provision to, transfer the land around the Robert F. Kennedy Stadium in D.C. to the city, which started this whole conversation about, government assets and how they're managed.
Okay.
And believe it or not, there was even a line item in there to outlaw the distribution of, get this, AI-generated non-consensual pornography.
They really covered a lot of ground in that bill.
They did, right.
It sounds like, a mix of the practical and then the kind of unexpected.
It's like a grab bag, and that's often the case with these huge spending bills, They just become vehicles for all sorts of little pet projects and policy goals, and that can make them super hard to understand and even harder to pass.
So besides the whole debt ceiling fight, was that what ultimately killed the initial bill? Just the fact that it was so massive and had so much crammed into it.
It was definitely a combination of things, The size and cost, for sure, were a concern for some Republicans, like Representative Thomas Massie. They've been wanting spending cuts, for a long time. They saw this bill as just like more government bloat.
Interesting. So even though Trump and Musk both opposed the bill, it sounds like they had different reasons than some of those fiscal conservatives in the House.
Yeah, exactly. Trump was all about the debt ceiling. It was probably, like we said, a strategic move for his second term, while Musk seemed more worried about the size of the bill and, perceived waste. But together, their opposition, and the concerns of those fiscal conservatives, it was enough to take down the whole deal.
It's kind of a reminder that political alliances, they're not always, set in stone.
Yeah.
And groups that seem totally different can actually find common ground, even if they have different reasons for it.
Absolutely. And it really highlights the importance of, understanding all the little details of these political debates, to look past the headlines and really consider, where everyone's coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so the initial deal's dead. Congress is scrambling to avoid a shutdown, and they finally agree on this, slimmed down version.
Yeah.
But the debt ceiling, the thing Trump was so focused on, that's still an issue, right?
Oh, yeah, it's still out there. The current debt limit, it's suspended till January 2025. But as part of the agreement to pass this spending bill, the House GOP, they promised to deal with it early next year.
So it sounds like we're heading for another showdown. What does that mean for, the average person who's just trying to understand all of this?
Well, I think it shows that these political fights aren't just, some abstract game. They actually have the potential to affect the economy. And that, of course, impacts our jobs, our savings, our whole financial well-being.
Yeah, that makes it real. So what can we expect from this debt ceiling debate?
Well, the House GOP, they agreed to raise the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion. But there's a catch. They're planning to do it through this process called budget reconciliation.
Budget reconciliation. Can you explain what that is? Sounds pretty technical.
It is a bit, yeah. But essentially, it's a way for the majority party in the Senate to pass certain budget things with a simple majority. They can bypass the usual 60-vote thing.
Oh, so it's a way to avoid a filibuster and push things through without needing, bipartisan support.
Exactly. And in this case, the House GOP, they're going to use budget reconciliation to raise the debt ceiling and at the same time cut $2.5 trillion in federal spending.
Hold on. So they want to increase the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion,
Yeah.
but then cut spending by $2.5 trillion. That's a pretty big shift.
It is, and it's going to be a huge point of debate. You've
Yeah.
got those fiscal conservatives who've been pushing for cuts forever, and then, of course, you have Democrats who are probably going to fight any cuts to, social programs.
It sounds like we're in for another wild ride. But why should the average person care about this debt ceiling fight? Like, what's the real impact?
It could affect the entire economy. If Congress can't raise the debt ceiling, the government could default, and that could lead to, higher interest rates, a stock market drop, even a recession.
Okay, so that's something we should definitely be paying attention to. But with Musk, seemingly part of all this now, I can't help but wonder how that's going to change things moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think we're just starting to see how these, non-traditional players can affect things. Musk, he can rally public opinion on social media. He's got this close relationship with Trump. It's a whole new thing that could really shift the balance of power. And we don't know how it'll all play out.
So what does all this mean for, the everyday person trying to understand all these complicated financial and political things? There's a lot going on.
There is. But I think the main takeaway here is that, business, finance, and politics are all super intertwined. And the decisions that happen, in those big government buildings, they impact all of our lives.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we can't just sit back and watch. You've got to stay informed, get involved, and, hold our leaders accountable.
I totally agree. And it shows how important it is to, think critically. We're constantly bombarded with information. And it's so easy to just hear what we want to hear.
Yeah, we really have to be careful about, where we're getting our information from and to really look for sources that give you different sides of the story and really dig deep.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Speaking of sources, we've been using all these articles, right, to try to figure out this whole government funding thing. But how do we know we're getting the whole picture? The media, they have a huge influence on how people see things.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We live in a world where there's just so much information coming at us from all sides.
Right.
It's easy to get stuck in these echo chambers or filter bubbles where we're only seeing things that already fit with what we believe.
Yeah, those filter bubbles are dangerous.
They are.
So how do we break out of those, and actually understand these complicated issues? It's all about really looking for different perspectives, questioning, the stories that we're being told, and thinking about the motivations, the biases even, of the sources that we're, relying on.
So don't just take everything at face value. Do your own digging, think critically, and form your own opinions.
Exactly. Be an active participant, not just a passive, consumer.
So this whole fight over government funding, it feels like it really exposed some, cracks in our political system. We barely avoided a shutdown, and now there's this whole other battle coming up over the debt ceiling. It's kind of unsettling, isn't it?
It definitely shows the challenges that our political system's facing, yeah. But it's also important to remember that democracy, it's a messy process. You need compromise, negotiation, and a willingness to, work with people who see things differently.
So a little messiness, it comes with the territory.
Right.
But, then you add in people like Musk with all their influence, it just adds a whole other layer of complexity. It's like we're in uncharted waters here where wealth and social media, they can really sway decisions.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about accountability and transparency. How do we make sure that the people in power, whether it's elected officials or, influential figures like Musk, are really acting in the best interests of everyone?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone's figured out the answer yet, but it's definitely something we have to think about, as we move into this new era of political influence.
I agree. And it brings us back to, how important it is for people to be involved. The more informed and engaged we are as citizens, the better we can hold those in power accountable and demand that they, serve the public good.
Yeah. And, we've talked about all the political maneuvering, the debt ceiling drama, the influence of people outside the government, like Musk. But what about the human cost of all this? Remember those 800,000 federal employees who might not have gotten paid right before Christmas? That must have been incredibly stressful.
Absolutely. It reminds us that these political decisions have, real-life consequences. We're not just talking about numbers and policies. We're talking about people's lives, their families, their ability to, pay their bills.
One of the articles we read talked about how this funding fight actually affected disaster relief efforts. After Hurricanes Helene and Milton, those communities need help to rebuild. and any delays in funding can have a huge impact.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It shows how urgent these situations are. Our leaders really need to put the well-being of the people affected by these disasters first.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, the political stuff, the financial side of things, how global this whole thing is. But I want to end on something a bit more, I guess, personal. It's easy to feel powerless when you see these huge systems at play, politics and finance. What can we do to feel more in control?
Being engaged is so important. Voting, contacting our representatives, joining groups that advocate for what we believe in. These are all ways to make our voices heard and to, be a part of shaping the decisions that affect us.
That makes sense. But what about people who just feel overwhelmed by all the information, the complexity of these issues? It can be a lot.
It's true. It can be overwhelming. I think it's important to be really selective about where we get our news from. Find sources that are reliable, unbiased, and present things in a way that's easy to understand.
Makes sense.
And take breaks from the news sometimes. Focus on things that bring you joy. It's all about finding that balance.
So to wrap up our deep dive into this government funding showdown, it seems like the big takeaway is, well, we're living in a time that's changing really fast. A lot of uncertainty. Old ways of doing things are being challenged, and the stakes are higher than ever. But there's also a lot of opportunity.
I think that's a great way to put it. As citizens, we have the power to shape the future. We can demand better from our leaders and work towards a world that's fairer, more just and more sustainable for everyone.
Yeah, I like that. So as we move into the new year with the new administration and this debt ceiling battle ahead of us, what's one thing you think our listeners should really keep in mind?
Stay involved, stay informed, and remember that your voices, together, they really matter.
Great advice. Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been quite a journey. And like always, I learned a lot.
It was my pleasure. And remember, the conversation keeps going, Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep pushing for a better future.
That's it for this episode of Capital Gains. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the stuff that really matters. Until then, stay curious and stay engaged.